Happy Friday and welcome to Career Launch Live. I am your host, Catherine McCord, and I have today with me a very near and dear human to my heart. I cannot wait to bring her on. We're going to be continuing our conversation about psychological safety and how to actually put it in practice, especially when dealing with the isms and toxicity. So without further ado, let me bring on one of my favorite humans in the entire world, Miss Kristin Durney. Welcome.
Catherine, thanks for having me, and one of my favorite humans too. So I'm so excited to be here. Been looking forward to this all week. So
Thank you. I am so stoked. I mean, good grief. Anytime I can have one of my HRDS humans here, and for those of you that don't know, that's HR Disruptor. Chris and I are both facilitators with that group run by Miss Jan Barlow. If you don't know it, check it out. They are fantastic. We have great events, not just for HR people, which is a little misleading with the name, but neither here nor there for this. So today we're talking about psychological safety and how we can actually put it into practice and how we can use it to help get rid of some of the most toxic parts of the workplace. So tell us first a little bit about you and your background, please.
thank you, Catherine. So Kristin Durney, and I am co-founder of Mental Wellness Unleashed. And actually, my background really has been 25 plus years in human resources, mainly in the corporate arena. Last 5 years as an entrepreneur with Mental Wellness Unleashed. I'm really excited to be here because, a little bit of my personal background. I was able to, be in the HR realm for so many years and as HR executive. But I really want to share my personal experience as well. Having PTSD, clinical depression, and anxiety really has made me so passionate about this topic today, because when we can bring our full selves to work, we're bringing our best selves to work, and vice versa. So that's psychological safety. And, I know, Catherine, we had the opportunity to connect on this earlier. And I always want to share my personal story, because I always want people to understand that when we have mental health conditions, and if we don't, psychological safety is so absolutely vital and imperative for businesses and for our own personal safety as well. So when we start
Absolutely.
start talking about some of these things today, this is really all holistically encompassing. So
Absolutely. And I love that you started with that. And I'm a big believer in talking about, everything going on. So for anybody who doesn't know, I am physically diverse, neurodiverse, and have mental health diagnoses as well. And so this stuff really does, hit home. And it's also something that I've just seen in practice, again, from the HR side, right? From the people operations and employee relations side. That's very much something that I've seen needed. And it's also needed for those marginalized groups who have been on the outside for a long time. Some of it, like the physical diverse, also racially diverse, religiously diverse, so on and so forth, LGBTQIA, and all the other marginalized groups. There's, it's one of those things you have to really understand that just because something is not your experience doesn't mean that it's not valid and important. So we have to leave space for everybody, and for everybody to be able to understand, right? Seth Butler hit that home real well for us about curiosity. So let's talk about that real quick. How do we, when you're with psychological safety, right? It's so kind of all encompassing of culture. And I touched on that last week with Javier Ortiz. And so we kind of have already discussed that, but how do you use that when you're dealing with the isms like racism and ageism and all the other isms and toxicity?
The first thing I want to bring up is actually doing a webinar for HR Dive. And one of the things that we're doing in March, and one of the things we did during the initial interviews, talk about something that's very important, and that's equity. So it's instead of DEI, I want to go EDI, and we can't have diversity or inclusion without equity. So equity hierarchy is really the hierarchy, meaning we're all on the same playing field. Think about it like a baseball field, right? We're all on the same, like you just mentioned, race, gender, ageism, that kind of thing. So we have to be on the same playing field. And then when equity means not just like equal and pay fair, it means like, what does talent development look like? What does succession planning look like? Are we all involved in these different things? So that's the first thing that I want to bring up: equity, inclusion. And then we have different areas around inclusion, around what makes inclusion. That's belonging, feeling safe to be ourselves. Then we have the 4 stages of psychological safety that Dr. Clark talks about in this book, 4 stages of psychological safety. Then we have the learner stage, where we feel we can actually utilize our skills and contribute when we're learning and actually get that feedback and receive feedback in a safe place. Then
so I want to hit on that real quick. Hold on, real quick. I want to hit on the learning because the feedback and the understanding are so vital when building a truly inclusive culture. And so I want to kind of pause on that real quick. So one thing that I get asked about a lot is, how do I create a situation where it's safe for someone to ask questions to understand how to be more inclusive, which can sound stupid when you're on when you're in a group and you understand that this should be a duh, but it's really not always, right? And so when you're in a marginalized group, it's not always something that it's not always easy to understand why the other side doesn't get it, right? But sometimes people really do want to understand and to be better. So how do you create that piece for the learning, and what's important to already have in place just as a company that you should already have there?
Absolutely. So number one, we want to talk about the sanctuary of inclusiveness. So long as we all feel inclusive, that there's something around HR leadership where we talk, or even leadership in general, we talk about being vulnerable. Being vulnerable takes time and it takes effort. So when we're being vulnerable, that's when we talk about, okay, what does that look like? That assembles my accountability. That allows me to be inclusive. That allows me as a leader to say, I'm building human connection with my team, and vice versa. So to your point, Catherine, when we talk about the learning pieces, that means we're able to make mistakes, turn them into learning moments. We feel safe. We're able to challenge the status quo and bring up some great ideas, and not just be that group consensus. Oh yeah, let's just do it that way. And then,
right.
You know what I mean? And then receiving feedback, vice versa. So we feel comfortable. So for instance, you had a great post the other day, I think it was yesterday, about listening and adjusting. Yeah. I love that post. So when we listen and we sit down and say, what do you need from me as a leader? And then we say, let me adjust that. And how can we help you develop that, whatever you need, right? So learning is all about inclusivity. Again, that's why they're in stages. Inclusivity is number one, learning is number two, right? And then we have four. So learning is really about, okay, I feel safe also to utilize my skills and talents and qualifications.
Yeah.
People often have approached me and they say, I'm really worried if I do this, someone's going to think I'm trying to show off or up one or something like that. And so when we are a team, and we are a high growing team, high performing teams are growing teams are committed teams. And as leaders, if we can get our teams to get on that inclusivity train, as I call it, that means we as leaders are doing the right thing. They have the human connection, build that trust.
100%. And actually, it's funny that you bring up that post, because that was actually a story about me struggling with the diversity of someone else. So we had conflicting neurodiversities that were just butting heads really hard. And I was just floundering. It was frustrating because I've historically been pretty good at training. And so I was just frustrated and just getting irritated. And so you have to also break down your ego and say, oh, okay, it's not me. And Javier talked about that in the last episode, that it's not, you have to remember, it's not a personal attack when somebody, needs you to do something differently. When somebody needs you to approach something in a different way, it's not saying that you're bad or terrible or has a different idea than you. That you need to calm down with the ego, remind your brain that you're still safe, right? and then proceed and ask for help and ask other people what they need. That was kind of the hit of that post, was you need to ask other humans what they need and what you can do to help them. And I do think it's important to break down that ego. So I wanted to hit on that too. Just break down your ego, because it doesn't help anything. It's a natural response, but it's not always a helpful response.
Well, and I think that's where the vulnerability comes in with leadership. So when we're able to be vulnerable on both sides, that's really what builds that trust and rapport. So I love what you said about ego, because when someone said the other day, someone said something about competition. If we're in a competitive mode, that's like a compliant thing. Like, we need to be compliant. We need to do this. We need to do that. So when we take away that complicity, compliance, competitive edge, then we're looking at, okay, what is that? It opens up holistically us to talk about what is, as you said, how can I break down my ego as a leader, trainer, whomever you are, to say, let me get on the same playing field to say, what do my team members need from me? Right. And I mean, one of the times when I was leading a team, they were like all on one wall, and I literally would just check with them every single day. I mean, it was a thing for me. And we didn't really have to have staff meetings unless it was something where we just had to get together, because I checked in with them every single day, because I knew I'm going to ask them, what do they need from me today? Not just this week. What do you need from me today? And I think if we can build that rapport and relationship, then our team members feel so comfortable to come to say, hey, Catherine, I'm example was one of my employees was really, team members was really struggling with some payroll stuff. And I brought him up because I saw her body language. I'm like, are you okay? And she just broke down. And what can I do for you as a safe place? What can I do for you? And she's like, I just need a break. So I said, take 2 weeks off and I'll figure it out. I'll figure the rest out. So I think
good for you. That's a good leader moment.
Well, and we were talking about earlier, like what can we do as leaders? We can step in and notice when our team members are under emotional duress. And when we're training, as you said, what are those differences that I need to check myself as a leader to say, what can I do to take a step back, as you said, and say, okay, let me stop for a minute. Let me just for a minute, be patient and figure out what it is that they need and listen.
Yes.
And
yes.
And listening is an effective skill in communication. So when we sit down and just truly listen and be passionate, then things start to fall in place. But that is a skill that can be developed, and you can't fake that. So authenticity goes with vulnerability.
Right. It 100% does. And especially leading into talking about getting rid of understanding, like, transphobia, racism, ageism, phobias against, ableism, is one, which, if you don't know, that's prejudice against disabled or perceived disabled persons. It's so important, A, to get rid of that ego, but B, to listen. Listen. That is the number one thing. People will tell you what they need, what they're able to do, and you need to trust them. Don't assume, that you know what they can do. Assumptions rarely pan out.
Assumptions are dangerous.
They are.
Be dangerous.
They are.
And you know what? I'm going to say something to what you just said about the listening. So, have you ever been in a situation where you're talking to someone and you can see their minds going, "What am I going to say back?" Like they're not. You know what I'm saying? Like when you're emotionally intelligent, you know when someone's listening, you know when they're not, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I've been in situations where I see. I mean, they're not. I already see. Okay, my response is going to be like, "But you're not like
you're not listening."
Listen
and process.
Exactly. Like I talk fast, I think fast. So what I do is I know I do that. So when I'm listening, I'm making sure I'm focusing on that person and focusing on the person, really listening, looking at body language, eyes, as leaders, look in their eyes, have that body language, sit down, relax, be at the same, always say even with recruiting, and this as a recruiter, when you have a candidate, you always want to be at eye level, right? So the same thing with leadership, saying you want to be that eye level,
Oh yeah.
Let me be, and I'm not saying standing eye level, but I'm saying at that level where you're really both having a human connection.
Right. It's not so much a physical thing as a symbolic thing. Yeah. And do be respectful, of course, of other people's preferences and their communication and all of that. But I do also want to hit on, so this listening is so very important. And one thing, when you want to get rid of the toxicity and the isms, right? All the negative things that can come up. One thing that I have found very helpful is that you just need to stop thinking of yourself as, oh, I am not racist, so therefore nothing I do can be racist. You need to think to yourself, I do not want to be racist, or I do not want to be homophobic, or I do not want to be part of ableism or anything else. That's the key, because you're going to make mistakes, and because you were maybe taught wrong, or maybe you just didn't realize that something was offensive. Stop with the ego defense again. Realize that somebody else's experience matters, and that you may be doing something offensive completely inadvertently. So you need to be willing to listen, learn, and adjust accordingly. So again, with the ego, we're really bashing on ego today. Get rid of that ego when you're trying to connect to other humans, and when you're wanting to get rid of toxicity and any kind of ugly behavior in the workplace, and really listen to those other humans and think to yourself, okay, I don't want this behavior. So what I'm hearing is there needs to be an adjustment to this. Thoughts?
I think that's a great point, and I want to go back to what you said about curiosity. I think a lot of leadership and team members in general don't want to either ask questions or say something because they're worried they're going to be judged or they're going to say the wrong thing. I think we have to give ourselves grace to be able to ask questions, to be curious, and not disrespectful, obviously, but if there's something that you need to know more about, because to your point, we don't want to be this, we don't want to be that, but sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So if we ask questions and we're curious about things and we can have an open dialogue with respect and trust, as you said, Catherine, we learned a lot about that with the HR DS Summit around how we can really be curious and ask questions. That also checks our ego. Because when we're curious and we want to know more about somebody and what's going on with them, then that's our ego can't be there, because curiosity and ego don't go together. I mean,
no, they don't.
And someone, being in HR for so long, I've had people come in and say, I'm scared to say something. They're going to get mad at me. And I'm like, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. Like, if you have something that you're curious about, ask a question if you don't know. But keep it respectful. But I think that's where the ego thing sometimes gets in the way with the curiosity.
Right.
That's vulnerability.
And it can be a smart idea to have a third party there to help.
Absolutely.
Because it can feel very attacky, for lack of a better word or term, when somebody just comes up to you, and also do leave space for, you see a lot about people talking about not wanting the full burden of education to be on them. I'm not like that. I will talk your ear off about every diversity thing about me and not shut up. So you'll kind of get the opposite with me, but that's me. That's how I am. And I have my days where I tell people, not today, let me circle back to you tomorrow. So be prepared for people to tell you, I appreciate your question, but I'm not in a place to answer that right now. And it could just be a bad day. It could be maybe they really don't know. It could just be they just feel like you need to look it up on your own, and that's perfectly fair enough for them to be at that stage right then. So one thing that I do recommend to people that are on the receiving end of this is to at least recommend resources.
Absolutely.
Tell people a good place, because where you get your information matters. Sometimes when you just Google something, you don't get the right answer. So I do tell people, please be careful just telling people do the research on your own, because sometimes it can be confusing to get the right information. So maybe recommend some great sites, especially I've dealt with that a lot with the neurodiverse and physically diverse communities, very, very much so. It's getting better, but it really is still a thing. But also give grace to other people and where they are, that they may not want to answer your 50,000 million questions, So do be mindful of that as well.
Catherine, I wanted to say something real quick. We're talking about action items today and some things we can do. And there was something that I did work for a large healthcare company, and they brought me over to help with one of the departments over there because they're having so many issues between doctors and nurses and this and that. I built a mediation program, and it was in a positive direction. It was around, okay, we're having issues, let's mediate what that looks like for both parties. So it was a very safe environment for people to come in, and we're talking people that really, there was communication issues, there were lack of understanding. There was really no psychological safety was really, it's kind of like on the scratch to bottom up, right? So this mediation program was so helpful. It was basically saying, okay, I want someone to help me mediate that is a neutral person. And then so when we would go in there and have these conversations, what was really interesting about this mediation program, which is why I really want to bring this up around ego, everything came down to trust. And what psychologically safe environments and cultures built on? Trust. And so I was actually I was like shocked myself. I'm like, everything's coming down to trust. And not that this is a while back. This is years back. We know that psychological safety with Amy Edmondson, Dr. Edmondson was born in the 1990s. But even then, this was in like 2007. And I was like, this is really interesting. And this was what really got me into the whole trust factor of how trust really kind of goes out to all, leadership and team members and whatnot. And that was really telling, but it was also, this mediation program really helped people understand other people's points of view, because it was a very neutral, safe place.
Right.
Where people were able not have to tell, I'm going to get new mediation. It was something where people did it in a confidential manner. I think that's another thing, solutions as well, is when you said earlier, sometimes we need a neutral party. When it's done really well, it works really well.
Yes. Yes, it does. And we did have a comment, that blowback can happen if you're not in a healthy culture. Absolutely, 100%. So we're talking about how things ought to be and how to build that. But I do want to 100% say, yes, there are plenty of companies out there where things will just blow up because there's not psychological safety. So how do you create it? From the last episode that I did with Javier to this episode, that's what we're talking about, fixing and how to do that and how to breed that. And really, I think it comes down to trust, like you said. It comes down to building that kind of confidence with your team where they can speak up, where they can have dissent and not worry, where they can make a mistake and not worry, and where they can ask curiosity. Like you said, it kills the ego. They cannot coexist. It's not a thing. And so it's so beautiful to come in and be able to just ask your questions and be curious. And I love one of the tools that I like to use are inclusion talks, where you have somebody in workshops. I like the workshop better. Yeah. Where somebody starts off with kind of like an intro, kind of like we did at HRDS. We keep referencing that. I think we're geniuses at HRDS. Go Jan for building that. But I really love the format because we saw how it works. And I've seen it with clients too. I've done it elsewhere. And so have you, where you start to ask more questions. You have that initial conversation. Okay, this is what we're going to talk about. This is what it means, yada, yada. And the psychological safety created with vulnerability. Notice our most successful session started with complete vulnerability on behalf of the person leading it. And all of us did it in different ways. You did it in a different way. I did, Seth did, Jerry did, Lois did, but we reached the same point of showing vulnerability. And then people started asking. So when you're trying to get rid of toxicity and the isms, it's important to create a very specific safe space where people can talk and ask questions and get it all out and in the appropriate environment, because you don't want these things exploding in the middle of a work day. That's not very helpful. It will happen, but you want to try to create the initial education and inclusion in a controlled environment. What are your thoughts on that, Kristin?
I totally agree. I think the other word I'll use is lack of no judging. I mean, when you feel the judgy piece going, it's like, oh God, you freeze up. Right. If I say something, and you may be completely different from someone else's point of view, but the fact you can say something and not be judged, I think is really important. I love the inclusivity, hosting workshop with inclusivity. I think one of the areas of action items that we talk about is, we talk sometimes about hosting anxiety parties, hosting inclusivity parties, meetings, anything that can really help with that sharing, that openness, that vulnerability. And how do you do that? A lot of leaders come to me and they're like, I would love to do that, but I'm not sure exactly how I do it. Like, how am I supposed to do that? Right. Having things like inclusivity meetings and having scheduled workshops to actually build that into your culture is something that is so very imperative. And I think that if leadership and leadership really starts to do those types of things, those small changes, they seem small, are very large, because it shows leaders are really concerned and caring about their team members. So I love that.
100%.
I think that's great. I think one thing is you really need to schedule that in and make it almost a monthly, or maybe it's a bi-weekly, where people come in and say, these are the things I'm thinking, and I'm in a safe place. So to your point, it's not going to blow up in some random meeting. You've got an inclusivity meeting where team members come in and they actually can sign up for it or whatever. Yeah. They know this is a safe place for me to, and maybe you do have a neutral facilitator to help, facilitate these greatest things, right? Because they can help neutralize any dissenting ideas. And it's
fascinating. It's fascinating to watch it work. I recently did this with a city government group. A lot of the managers did sign up completely voluntarily to come in and learn. And it was so cool to hear them all just start to really talk to each other. And it left me leading it to them communicating, right? It was the coolest experience. They would just, oh, I didn't know that you were having that experience. Can you tell me more about that? And it would just kind of take off. And it was such a beautiful thing. And so now they are doing it more regularly, and they're kind of picking that up. And I think that when you create that safe space, the psychological safety, right? It helps to get rid of all of these other ugly things, because then you're safe to talk about it, to clear the air, and to squash the nonsense just outright.
Well, and that's not about you. People are signing up voluntarily. And that's what I thought I say. When you have people sign up voluntarily, people want to be heard. That's the thing.
Yes.
They want to be heard. and they want to be heard in a way where they can be off their authentic self and say what they want to say. And obviously, we always have the thing, be respectful, be confident, all those things. But when people like you, they would sign up voluntarily. Knew, okay, this is my safe place I get to go to. And then that starts to build out the psychological safety within the organization. When people see these things are happening and leaders taking action, and they're actually I'm going to have an inclusivity meeting, and, it's scheduled for, Tuesdays at whatever time, lunchtime. Let's say it's lunchtime, bring a pizza, whatever that looks like. Food always brings people in. But, it really is important to have that leadership say, we talked about how can we take these actions to show I really truly want to hear what you have to say. And that goes we talk about, contribution, talk about challenging. This gives the opportunity, inclusivity meetings, to have those opportunities in the 4 stages of psychological safety, to have that opportunity to contribute, to add value, and to challenge us to say, I've got some great ideas. Let me show you what my idea is. And just trusting to say, I can share these things. Maybe I'm not going to use your idea right now, but I love the fact you shared it maybe later. The fact that we're just running, you said education earlier, education awareness, that's huge. You've got to have that before you can start to really say, okay, I'm being educated on something else that I didn't know anything about. I'm getting aware on this. And now I'm be curious, ask more questions. And that opens up curiosity where you can say, okay, I have more questions around that, whether it's ageism, whether it's, whether it's trans, whether it's, mental health, whatever that is, then people will say, okay, I feel safe to ask questions. And then the vulnerability starts to up the ante.
Right.
So
And it's so cool to watch too. It's a really cool process to watch work. And I've seen people go, oh, well, so-and-so's never going to do that because they are just so ingrained in their white privilege or whatever. Sometimes that's true. And sometimes that person's just not going to end up being a cultural fit and you have to let them go. But sometimes what starts to happen is even the most hard-headed, just I don't want to listen person in the right healthy environment will all of a sudden start to ask those questions, and we'll start to turn, and we'll start to get, start to change their attitude. Sometimes it's also fear-based. A lot of people don't realize it seems like
it was, oh my God, what's telepathy? I mean, fear, that's exactly what it is.
That's exactly what it is. It's fear to talk, fear to understand, fear that something bad will happen to them, just because everything's changing. And so you have to kind of give, again, that safe space and that safe learning. And in the work environment, especially the bigger your organization is, this really needs to happen. You really need to be having these inclusion meetings. I've seen them work at the largest corporate levels all the way down, like I said, city governments, all the way down to startup companies. It works. Build it out from the ground up using psychological safety, and it really works.
Well, and I really want to go back to also, I think you had heard me talk about the Google study that was done, and where psychological safety was the number one, in terms of building high performing teams. Then you have dependability. Then you have structure and clarity. What am I supposed to be doing? What are my roles? And then you have meaning. What am I? Meaning, pun intended. Meaning, what am I bringing? What's my purpose? What purpose I'm bringing to my work, my work, and to the team itself? And then, to your point, Catherine, organizational. That's when you bring impact, and that's when you're bringing that amazing innovation to the organization, yourself and your team. So it all really funnels down from inclusivity. Really, all those things from top down is all about being inclusive.
Yeah, 100%. And that, what, with that, that's the end of the show. I don't think I can add anything else to that. That's it. We did it. You were great. And I love that Dr. J, who is also a member of the HRDS family, chimed in with us today. Hi, Jay. And congratulations to her. She has some big news that she had today. So congrats to Dr. J. She's somebody you should all be following. Trust me, just absolutely. Wisdom galore out of that woman's mouth. Basically, she is a wonderful human. Basically, guys, just as you're watching the show, remember psychological safety. Build it from the ground up. It matters. If you want to know more about how, reach out to Kristin. She is an expert. She will walk you through this. She really knows her stuff. For anything else, definitely connect to either one of us. If you have questions, thoughts, concerns, need help with anything, we are here for you. Connect to us on LinkedIn. Absolutely. What are your final words of wisdom for everybody today, Kristin?
So my final words of wisdom, I said earlier, in order for you to bring your best self to work, you have to put your full self to work. And that means when we talk about catalysts for innovation, that's taking risk, making mistakes, making them learning moments, challenging the status quo, and giving and receiving feedback, and being curious, and all being inclusive, for all differentiating ideas and opinions, and being safe to able to open up that conversation. And as leaders, really have those inclusivity meetings, schedule these inclusivity meetings, schedule things, even if it's groups and individuals, make sure you're really getting that human connection with your team members.
100%. As leadership, you are a servant to the people that you take care of. Your whole job is to take care of those humans, including the ones who maybe don't want to be social, who maybe don't want to talk a whole lot. You still need to be taking care of them too. So with that, thank you so very much for joining me, Kristin. Same time, same place next week, folks. Different topic. Have a great weekend.